Hello, Mr. Tripp. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's good to be here.
It's wonderful. And we were just remarking on the meta-ness of this conversation
Hmm.
being about the conversation you're having with the world whilst we're having a conversation with the world.
Indeed, yes, yes. Meta is very 21st century, so I think that's a good thing.
It is indeed. So let's start with, actually, I might give a little bit of a backdrop. So we were talking, I think this was actually before the last show we did. So we did a show not too long ago about sort of diagnostic versus dialogic.
Hmm.
Um, and as before we actually recorded that, we were sort of chatting back and forth about topics. And I was saying something about sort of creativity and expression and marketing. And then you said, "Oh, I call that the conversation you're having with the world." And I was
Hmm.
like, I love that so much. So we had the other conversation we had, and then we agreed to have this conversation about that conversation.
Yeah.
And I would love to start with just hearing how you define that, this idea of the conversation you're having with the world. What is that?
Okay. So speaking for myself, if I roll back over a decade, I was an NLP trainer who had no internet presence whatsoever. I did not really exist on the internet. I think I had a Facebook account, but that wasn't for any reason other than communicating with people who were interested in similar things to me. And the 2008 global financial crisis came along, and it ruined my NLP training business, and it ruined my hypnotherapy clients business, because this is the two things I was doing at the time: running NLP trainings, and I was a hypnotherapist. And suddenly I had considerably fewer clients, and I couldn't fill an NLP training. So I thought to myself, what am I going to do about this? And I spent my sort of last few £100 or whatever it was on getting a consultation from a marketing expert who essentially told me to forget being an NLP trainer, and said, the reasons he said this, he said, like, look, NLP is not your thing. So you will never sit at the top of that pyramid. You will always be sitting at somebody else's feet. And in fact, who are you
Not
in the
your
NLP
thing, as
world?
in not your
Yeah,
creation.
not my
Mm.
creation. It's not my, it's someone else's baby. And, or the way he put it is, it's someone else's pyramid. And
Mm.
the best you could do is work your way up that pyramid to sit at the feet of the people whose pyramid it is. Or you stay at the base, in which case the only way you're going to get business is through lowest common denominator stuff, he said, which is the being the cheapest and being the most local. That's
Mm.
it. He said, or the other alternative is you build your own pyramid.
Yeah, I must admit, you managed to find yourself a very like first principles marketing expert there.
Yeah, I think. Well, I mean, this guy changed my life in a sense.
Yeah, I can see why. I mean,
Yeah,
like, it's not average marketing advice, I would have said.
no, it wasn't. I mean, and his thing was just all about, it was all about, you got to have your thing. It's like you're not gonna, unless you not just carve your own niche, but just be entirely your own thing.
Mm.
Um, Now, when I first got this advice, I'm thinking, but I'm an NLP guy, and that's what I love. I love my NLP stuff. So it was kind of like a challenging thing. And I didn't really know what to do with this at first. I had these principles, and there was more to it than that. There was more to the consultation than that. But I had these principles, this idea in my mind. Oh, the other thing he was big on, and this is about 2000, well, yeah, this is late 2008, maybe early 2009, I think late 2008. The other thing he was big on was video. He was absolutely adamant that video was the way forward on the internet, because at the time it wasn't like it was now. The internet was a different
Mm.
thing in 2008. It wasn't like everybody was putting video out. He said, this is the next big thing, this is what you want to get on, and start making videos now. And I'm thinking, well, I've got to start making videos now, I've got to build my own pyramid. What? So
Mm.
I had no clue really how to do
And
this.
so this is a real trip down memory lane. I don't know if I've ever shared with you, but my background is in web. And
Right.
and I've got kind of like real place markers of like different things around different times.
Uh-huh.
And my son was born in 2008, so I kind of went on maternity leave to have him in 2008. So I've got like a real like marker of like where the technology was and where the market was around that time. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, you're quite right. It was again, this is like the best marketing guy ever. Like he's like
he's unquestionably good and unquestionably exactly who I needed to meet at that time. And
but you're
honestly,
quite right. It really wasn't like, I remember in the work I was doing at the time, I won't go into a big long story about what we were doing, but we were just starting to realize this exact thing about video and starting to prioritize the creation of video, sharing of video. But it really wasn't like the thing that everyone knew at the time.
Yeah. And I think that was why he was absolutely clear. You get ahead of the curve on this. This is going to be, a game changer for you. But the trouble is, it was good advice, but I just didn't know what my pyramid was. I just didn't have any kind of clue at all. But there was something else that was going on in my life. I've got this thing where I like to get really good at things. If I'm going to do something, it's my intention to get really, really good at it, be the best I can absolutely be at it. So one of the things that I was doing around that time, and this wasn't a professional thing, this was a thing aside from what I was doing professionally, I was doing a lot of street hypnosis. So I was going out in London, meeting up with these other strange individuals, and we were just basically going around hypnotizing tourists and things.
I don't know if I knew about that. You must have mentioned that at some point over the years.
Have.
But if you have, I've forgotten it. That is so cool.
Right. It's kind of cool and weird and geeky and stuff like that. And it was a real challenge for me. It was partly about developing the hypnosis skills, but it was partly also pushing myself way outside of my comfort zone, going up to strangers, doing hypnosis with them. And the thing about that kind of thing is, I was a hypnotherapist, but you have a controlled setting there. You've got people buying into the frame. So it's a completely different set of challenges, just accosting random strangers to do hypnosis with. So that was why I was doing it, because I'm a big believer in, find your developmental edges and go out way beyond them.
So like way beyond them in that instance. Yeah. Gosh.
And the other thing that I did, you see, because this was part of one of my learning strategies, and I've done it in lots of areas, I got a lot of video footage of me doing this for no reason other than that I could look back on what I was doing and go, I like that didn't work so well, or whatever, to up my skills. So I wasn't recording it for any other reason.
I have to interrupt you at this point.
Yeah.
Listeners, I can tell already, I've got them like so tuned in now to the listeners. I can hear their voice in my head. They're like, photographic evidence, or it didn't happen?
Yeah, it's on my YouTube channel.
Excellent. Okay, we'll make sure we get the link. Yeah.
If people go to my early videos on my YouTube channel, they will see a much younger version of me. That's a bit shocking when I look at the sort of videos from back then. A much younger version of me doing street hypnosis stuff.
Brilliant.
That's the origin of my channel. So I had this footage, and it was not on an iPhone or on any digital. It was on an old camcorder that I'd recorded this on. But it just so happened. Now, my approach to street hypnosis was very different from the other people. A lot of other people were doing classic hypnosis. They were sort of pulling arms, doing rapid inductions, sleep deeper. And I didn't like that stuff for a variety of different reasons. So I developed this more interactive approach. And I was getting all the stuff done that they were doing, but without doing the trance inductions. And all of the regular street hypnosis people are going, how are you doing that? How is that even possible? And I was saying, because you don't need that trance induction. You're just engaging people's cognitive faculties. You're engaging their imagination. You're drawing them into an experience. There is no trance. There's no trance induction. It's just direct engagement and leading somebody into the experience.
This is probably, I was about to say a slight segue. It's probably a massive segue, but I'm afraid I have to go where my interest is going.
That's cool.
Hey, this is the conversation we're having in the world.
Yeah.
I guess particularly because of my shamanic work, which is obviously focused a lot around trance. I'm really interested to know, like, what you were doing. Was it truly not trance, or was it actually just without the typical trance induction, or is it just there's a different definition in hypnosis about trance that perhaps is different in other forms that have the word trance?
Yeah, probably all of those things. So,
Great.
so the thing is that when I say without trance, the classic model of hypnosis is there's this special state, which is called either hypnosis or trance, which somehow is the reason that people respond to the suggestions, right? So you have to put somebody into trance or under hypnosis or whatever the metaphor is, and then they become responsive in a way that they would not otherwise be. Right. Now, the question is, well, how are they responding to the suggestions that put them there in the first place? Right. Now, the fact is it's not really what's going on. It's the response that you need. It's the engagement that you need. So I'd go directly for the engagement. And now, in a sense, it depends on how you use the word. So I often talk about trance. I talk about trance a lot. There's one view of trance that I hold, which is that we're always in one kind of a trance or another.
Oh, yes. It's about really like different states of consciousness, isn't it? All the time.
Right. Exactly. We're never not in some kind of state of consciousness. So we're always in one type or another. So I see trance as being something that we're always in and can be shaped in a variety of different ways. And have sort of different content, different focus. We can have like what I would sometimes call a narrow bandwidth trance. So somebody's, say, doing anxiety or they go into a rage about something. I'd say that's a rage trance. And I would call that a narrow bandwidth trance because they're caught up in just this one idea. How dare they do that to me, right? That's the dominant shaping idea that they're caught in as creating a reality in the moment. Now, if I'm doing change work with people, what I'm often doing is I'm leading them out of these narrow bandwidth trances into what I call a broad bandwidth trance.
Yes.
So they're falling out of that, they're expanding out. And, like we have common reference points in the world of three principles. If you look at three principles, there's a lot of similarity to Ericksonian hypnotherapy. People don't realize it because it uses different language. But Erickson would talk about your conscious mind and your unconscious mind. But by conscious mind, he really was talking about what the 3P people are talking about when they're talking about your thinking. So, maybe a 3P coach would suggest you fall out of your thinking and into your well-being. Well, Erickson's like you fall out of your conscious mind and into your unconscious mind. And it's this talking about the same thing. It's the same thing. So it's a different state of being and a different state of engaging with the world. So when I say, so my thing became known as Hypnosis Without Trance. And this is the beginning of my conversation with the world. Yeah, go on.
There is something, I'm sure you've realized this, but I've just realized it actually wasn't a segue at all, because what you were doing was a conversation. Like it literally where you were having a different kind of conversation with those people.
Yeah. So when you say those people, you mean
the people that you were doing the Tripp hypnosis with?
Right. Yeah.
That was a conversation, wasn't it?
Sure.
And it was a different kind of conversation, and you could potentially say a more emergent conversation than a typical, like you say, those kind of trance inductions. I was just like, oh, it's interesting. I thought this was a complete segue out of the conversation we were having about conversations. So I was like, actually, it isn't. There's something really wonderfully intertwining in this.
Well, there is a parallel, because I think a lot in terms of generative feedback loops. This is a fundamental part of my worldview. So when I'm doing hypnosis with people, I always put quotes around it, because it's only hypnosis when you call it hypnosis. Otherwise, it's something else. So when I'm interacting with somebody, it's a generative, co-creative feedback loop. I'm engaging somebody. It's not that I'm the hypnotist and I'm doing a thing to them. It's that we are engaging with each other. There's this generative feedback loop, and we are co-creating a shift in experience, a shift in reality together.
Yes, hence conversation.
Yes, conversation. Yes. So it's very dialogic. In my book, which people can buy, it's called Hypnosis Without Trance. Typically, like, people will use this term of hypnotist and hypnotic subject. This is the classic nomenclature. I really dislike this. So in my book, I use the term operator and co-operator. That's co-operator, which is like, it's not like someone who's cooperating. It's like a co-pilot. You've got a pilot and a co-pilot. So it's a very co-creative process, the way I do hypnosis. And it's done through this live feedback loop, this conversation, this exchange. It's the same principle I take in creating through conversation wherever, whether it's via social media, with a client, with like in a street hypnosis situation. I don't do that stuff anymore, but whatever it is, I've still got this idea that we are co-creating. So if I'm on social media, I'm co-creating with my audience, with the people who are out there who are engaging with me. And part of that co-creation is through conversation, is being clear up front, or clear enough up front, about what I want to create through that conversation as well. So that's the same with hypnosis. Even if it's something like I used to do a lot of street hypnosis stuff with silly things like a name amnesia, or somebody's hand stuck to a table in a coffee shop or something like that. So I know the experience that I want to encourage the person into, or they're going to create it within their neurology. And then it's about the back and forth conversation, how I direct attention, lead cognition, and seed ideas to help them connect into that experience and experience it fully and vividly. So that's kind of what I'm doing there. But if I'm talking to people on social media and there's something, there's a new idea I want to share, I'm kind of clear about my outcome. But it's always a co-creation. I'm not ever going to go, here's the thing I'm going to force in a one-way sort of way on my audience and go, here's what I want you to think, here's what I want you to feel, here's what I want you to believe. Because I don't know if that's going to be a good fit for them.
I love this so much. This feels very synchronistic with something I wrote about a few days ago. I don't know if you saw it. It was talking about my journey and resistance to being a teacher. And I was talking about how more and more over the years, I very consciously, and it feels very natural anyway for me, but very consciously teach much more from a Socratic perspective. And I was talking about the word myotic, which is, in short, Socrates' mother was a midwife, and that is like of midwifery, myotic. And it is about kind of birthing the ideas, the knowledge, the wisdom from the person who you could say is the student. But I love this idea that the teacher isn't really like teaching anyone anything. It is very much this kind of like dance of, there's a birth happening and the person who's birthing, and then there's a person who's acting as the midwife. But there isn't like a person doing something to anyone else. It is this really beautiful unfolding and co-creation where there is something happening, like you say, this intention, like ultimately the baby is going to get birthed. But it isn't this kind of being done to experience for the student. It is this like midwifing. It feels really similar to this, but it's like interesting because I literally wrote this like 3 days ago or so.
Right. I mean, that's really resonant for me. In the world of hypnosis, there's this whole frame that was really dominant, particularly about 10 years ago. A lot of hypnosis teachers were like, you've got to be the hypnotist and act in this sort of, the mesmer rays are coming out of the eyes and all of this kind of thing. And that, it didn't really fit for me, and it didn't seem like a good fit for reality either. And as often as not, some people would respond well to that. Maybe they're a character type that likes being dominated or something like that. But a lot of people, they don't want that. It's kind of disrespectful. It doesn't honor their sovereignty or anything at all.
That's the word I use both in the post and literally as we were talking there. It's for me, it's like these things might work, but at what cost and then what outcome? Whereas more and more I see like, no matter what the thing is, when it is honoring everyone's sovereignty, what gets created is a product of sovereignty. And
and
I
that's
think
one
we're
of
very alike on this.
It's one of the issues for me. In a sense, I felt for a while that I'd become a prisoner of the hypnosis frame, which for a variety of different reasons, because of the way hypnosis is understood culturally, because it's worth remembering, hypnosis is a cultural idea as much as it's anything else. And the way it's understood culturally is that it's some kind of mind control thing, right? And everything that I'm about in my coaching work, my change work, is about empowering people to be able to meet the moments of their lives and create with them in adaptive ways, with more variety, more choice, to be in their power to create the outcomes that they would love to create. And, even when I was working as a hypnotherapist, because I put my work in that frame, a lot of people would show up expecting this magic thing called hypnosis to do something for them.
Mm.
And it fundamentally ran counter to things that I held dear within my heart, within my values, which is, I want people to be in their power. I want them to have agency in their lives. I know we can't, I don't believe in control for a start. None of us control our lives, but we do have options, choices, and power in how we show up and engage and dance the dance and all of this kind of thing. So, all my work is about putting people in that place. And there was a long time I felt this sort of contradiction between the hypnosis framing, which I had to do with this conversation with the world. I'd sort of created that frame for myself, actually as an experiment. And I put it out into the world, and people started buying that conversation. I got into that conversation with the world. It was a hypnosis conversation with the world. That was the one I was initially having. But that was experimental, you see, because the only reason, going back to my marketing guy,
I feel like we've totally stayed on topic, but we have wandered quite a bit.
We can stay on topic and have open loops.
Yeah.
So what happened is, because I happened to just be doing this hypnosis thing as an aside, because I was still seeing clients, and the thing that I really loved, the thing I loved about NLP was it put people in their power. It helped them connect with more choice in their life, more cognitive flexibility, more behavioral flexibility. That's what I loved about it. I think hypnosis has gone awry, but that's another topic. NLP's gone awry, but that's another topic.
Yeah, no, this is really helpful because I don't come from an NLP background, and I can see now the distinction why that was more appealing, in that compared to hypnosis, it is much more kind of it's much more about the person's agency rather than being done to.
It certainly was when it started out, and it drifted off course in the 80s. But if you go back to the first book on NLP, before it was called NLP, which is The Structure of Magic, Banner and Grinder are quite clear in that it's about increasing people's choices in their lives, right? They're very, very clear. They say, when people come to us for therapy, they're stuck or they're suffering or they're in pain. And it isn't because of a lack of choices in the world. It's because of a lack of choice represented in their model of the world. So our aim is to help people enrich their maps, so they have access to a greater range of choice in all of the moments of their lives. And that's what it started out as, and that's got lost, unfortunately, from NLP. But that's what I love about neurolinguistic stuff.
There's a couple of things just really coming into my mind as we're talking about these different models and their different intentions and kind of their more ancient roots. As you know, I often really like to look at kind of more like the ancient, more like indigenous human way of how these things first originated. And a couple of thoughts have just come to mind. One is our mutual friend Ryan Simbai Jenkins, being brought up as he did in an indigenous community in Papua New Guinea. He, part of his inspiration to move into hypnosis himself was his early experiences with shamans using what I can't remember if he's actually used this term, but almost like word magic. Very much in this kind of hypnotic way. But my sense is, and here is a long time since he and I directly spoke of that, but I think much more in this like respecting the person's agency rather than like doing to them, which is very much kind of, my own background in shamanism is actually, it's not really the shaman doing to, it is really respecting the other person's choices within that, which then reminded me of a book I often reference called Original Wisdom, which is set in Malaysia and also looking at indigenous people. And there was an example where there was the kind of village doctor, and the writer witnessed a person going to the doctor with, I think, some kind of stiff shoulder or something. And all the doctor did was like work with the person, ask them a series of questions at the point where the person remembered how they first did it, because they couldn't, it had been going on for months, didn't know what was the cause and all this thing. I went through a series of questions. They suddenly had this moment of like, oh, I slipped when I was carrying water or something along those lines. And it was like, from that moment, it was like there was a kind of conversation between the doctor and the person that allowed them to almost like, because they understood how they happened, they also understood like, oh, now this is what's required for healing. Did whatever it was, went to bed, next morning woke up and the pain had gone. And I was just like, there is something so like in what we're talking about here, so resonant in that, like this has ancient roots, this way of being in conversation, eliciting more awareness, more choice. Feels like, again, like these aren't things that we've like made up as modern humans. It's something that we're reclaiming, but also reshaping. Hey, the context's different. We're kind of like, we're reclaiming and also recreating it for now.
Yeah.
But all of what we're talking about here just feels so honoring of all those things, which is ultimately like how we actually do work as humans.
Well, I think that's a really interesting point, because, as I say, like I'm reluctant to use the term NLP because it was being developed all the way through the 70s, and I think it was doing a really good job of doing a lot of interesting things. And then before it was even called NLP, and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, it's such an inorganic metaphor.
Yes.
And do you know what it was called before it was called NLP? Meta.
No.
It's just called Meta.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
oh my
that's
gosh.
what it was called. And it's interesting we were talking about that before.
Wow, that's interesting.
But it started out with a project not to invent things, but to model people who were incredibly good at helping people make changes in their lives.
Of course,
right?
yes.
So it's going, what are these people doing? What's a different way of making sense of what these people were doing? Because, and particularly Fritz Perls and Virginia Satir to start with. So Virginia Satir is like a family systems genius, or was. And then the sort of highly shamanic, in a sense, psychiatrist and hypnotist Milton H. Erickson, who was known as the Wizard of the Desert, and is like there's loads. A lot of the stuff that you read about Erickson, people say the same sorts of things about being around Erickson as you hear people say about being around Sydney Banks, which is interesting. Like he just had this effect on people. So Banner and Grinder were going, well, how do we model these patterns and take them out and teach them to other people? And they had a lot of really interesting influences. Now, part of the influence on them was Alfred Korzybski, who's the general semantics guy. And his interest is how do we human beings make sense of the world? And how does that shape our experience of the world? So he was deep into language and sense making and this kind of thing. So that's part of the roots of NLP. I prefer to call it neurolinguistics. And another thing to look at the sort of shamanism crossover, actually, Banner and Grinder were very highly inspired by a lot of ideas that come in from Carlos Castaneda as well. Now, a lot of people say Carlos Castaneda made up a bunch of stuff and it wasn't all strictly true and all of that. I suspect, he's not there saying this all happened in exactly this way. He's capturing the spirit of something, the flavor of some of his experiences. They might not all be literally true stories, but he wants to bring the essence of it to the fore. So there's that kind of shamanism element in there as well. And also, I was saying this to somebody yesterday. I was talking to somebody who's very interested in shamanism yesterday, but has a very skeptical mind as well, like a very critical thinking mind, which sort of gets in the way of exploring.
I can relate.
Right. I should put her your way, maybe. So, and I was pointing out how, if you look at animism, there's a lot actually in how animism works and functions, in the sense of it being a way of making sense of complex interdependent, interconnected systems, very rich, organic, psychosocial, spiritual systems. Animism does a pretty good job of helping people engage with that complexity in useful ways, I think. That's a bias they have.
Can I just add something to that? That it was something I was talking to a podcast guest last week, I think it was, who, incredible guy who actually had been like raised in magic. So it's like the magical worldview was like just there, even though he was raised in like a fairly modern kind of life way. It just happened he was raised in a magical family. It was like a particular magical tradition was handed down from his grandmother. So he was like raised from, he was literally initiated into it at like a year old or something. So he literally grew up with magic being real. And he said something that it was, you know, when you think you know something and then someone says something and you go like, oh, okay, that sounds the same, but it just changes everything. He said something like, we're talking about animism. And he said something like, it's not just the kind of like, it's not just the original worldview. You know, we look at humans across history, across the world, and ultimately they all share some form of understanding like the world as animistic. And it's like, but it's not just the original one. It's actually like the natural human worldview. And that like, my mind just went, oh my God, of course it is. That's why it's the original one. That's why it's found out. It's the natural human way of making sense, the way of experiencing the world.
That's a very, very interesting thing.
It literally, like, I remember just like having this moment of like, wow, like, of course. That for me, it's like, I think I could almost like journey with that for the rest of my life. But that for me, there's something really important about that.
Yes, yeah. It's have you ever read The Patterning Instinct by Jeremy Lent?
No.
Yeah, it's an interesting book. It talks about, well, the patterning instinct, that we have these basic sense-making instincts, and therefore the sense we make shapes our engagement with the world. But it's sort of like a long, broad sweep history of human sense-making from animism forward to the present day. And his view is that actually we're kind of coming full circle again, finally. And that via science, like if you look at what's coming through in the world of complexity and complex systems dynamics and these sorts of things, it's a pretty good match for animism.
Yes. Yes.
And also Taoism, which he points out. So he's very much into Taoism and Neo-Confucianism as well, which is a blend of sort of Buddhism, Confucianism, and Taoism. And points, one of his theories is that Taoism actually is just an expression of the original shamanism.
I'm sure in the last conversation we had, I think it was then, you made some connection between Taoism and shamanism, which I found really interesting. I'd never seen that before, because I've been like really into Taoism and really into shamanism and animism. For some bizarre reason, I'd like them had on like two separate tracks. And it was like, when you said that, I'm like, oh yeah, of course. And I don't know why I hadn't like brought them together like that before, but it now makes complete sense. But for some reason, I just hadn't done that before.
Yeah, that was, I mean, I wouldn't have made that connection without reading Jeremy Lent's book. So, you know, I find that sort of useful, and that's a helpful thing. And I know, like, I was talking to, you know, Paul Leslie. Paul's been on your show.
I know. Oh, yes, I have. That's right. I don't know him as a friend. I have interviewed him. You're quite correct. In fact, I think, did you recommend him?
I might have done, yeah.
Yes, yeah, amazing. Yeah, we spoke about the magical worldview, in fact.
Yes. So it's you know, probably that would be a likely thing you would have a conversation with Paul about. But I was talking to Paul yesterday about this stuff, and actually, I'm going to change tack on that, because I completely forgotten what the connection with the conversation I had with Paul yesterday was.
I totally trust we're going everywhere we need to go.
Yeah, there was something in the conversation with Paul yesterday. Maybe it'll come back to me. But look, there's this thing about complexity and interaction and co-creation and all of this kind of thing. And certainly when it comes to so originally we were kind of talking about marketing. I don't like that term marketing. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't create a reality that has me feel good or come alive or anything like that. But I do like to engage co-creatively with people. And my job, if it's anything, is helping people move their minds, expand their map of the world, experience life differently, whatever it will be. When I'm working one-on-one with somebody, I see myself not as a controller or anything like that. I'm a catalyst or something like that, an orchestrator. I don't quite know how to put it. But first and foremost, I see myself as out to make differences, but not in a controlling way, but in a participatory way. I do not see that that's any different, whether I'm doing that one-on-one with a client, whether I'm communicating with my YouTube audience, whether I'm on a podcast. Do you see what I mean? We're exploring, we're creating. My hope always, if somebody is listening into a conversation like this, my hope is that something will go off. And I know it won't for everybody, but for a lot of people, there'll be something there that expands their perception of possibilities or something like that. And that's the thing that interests me. And I think that in doing that, we create a lot when we speak with people in the world. And I think that, speaking for myself, if I aim and go, right, I want to sell something to people, that's dead to me. That's not an alive thing. But if I can, if my aim instead is just to engage with people and to create with them and to create what I often call mind shifts with them, it's a little term, right? Mind shifts that are going to benefit them. Well, those mind shifts are going to benefit them. And then they actually come back to me with feedback from the mind shifts that have benefited them. And that feedback influences me and reshapes me and recreates me as well. And then that's going to change what I put out. And then it loops around. So the direction of travel. So if I talk about my work or whatever, my work is co-creative with the people who engage with it. I hope my dog's not overly dominating with his barking in the background.
I just love the fact it's not my dogs for one.
Yeah. Yeah. Somebody will have dared to move in the stairway outside our flat. That'll be the problem. Right. Yeah.
I'm just thinking our wonderful editor Dave is going to be just like, God damn it, James, rather than God damn it, Leanne. So
yeah. Forgive me for him not being under control, but I don't believe in control. So yeah, so that's that's kind of where I'm at. There's a whole conversation here that could fit in here, but it's a loop I'm afraid to open at this stage.
At this stage in the show, or
at this stage in your life. The show. There's a philosopher who I'm rather fond of called Hans-Georg Müller. And I first encountered him because he wrote a book on Taoism, and I've read a lot of books on Taoism. He's a German philosopher, but he speaks Mandarin Chinese, and he's like a scholar of Confucianism and Taoism, and is particularly into Taoism. He's also into Niklaus Luhmann, who's a modern German social systems thinker. He's got some really interesting ideas. So this philosopher's got these different perspectives. But he's also got a lot of views on the world and how the world's changing. So he's like a real philosopher, not some ivory tower philosopher. He is that as well, but he's actually interested in not these eternal human truths, but what's happening in the world right now. What's happening
within
with
the
regard
context.
to what's happening within our shifts in the collective psyche and these sorts of things. And he's got this model of what he calls identity technologies. And he points out that the way we create ourselves, we do not create ourselves on our own. We always create ourselves in feedback loops with our environment, with our peers, with the world around us. So there's a sort of inside out and outside in the creation of ourselves. And that if you go back, say, 100 years or something like that, the dominant, what he would call the dominant technology for creating ourselves is what he calls sincerity. And sincerity, the sincerity model means that we are assigned a role by birth, by whatever, so, somebody might just find out they end up being a blacksmith because they were always going to be a blacksmith or whatever. Or you go back even further, you're going to be a farmer because everyone's been a farmer. Or people would end up with social roles like father, mother, wife, husband, whatever. And the sincerity model was you live up to that sincerely. Right? So
and
if you're a mother...
Just to say, when you say someone, I can't remember quite the name you said gave to it, but it's like, this is almost... I can almost feel your own hesitation why you've not named this as directly, but it's almost like this is an expression of their soul or expression of their life path, as opposed to an externally imposed role.
Well, in a sense, it's not necessarily externally imposed. It's just that's where people would find themselves.
Yes. Yeah. But not like as in they've been told they have to be that by their parents or their village.
No, it wouldn't even occur to them necessarily inside of the consciousness that would go with this to even question it.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
It's just it's like not even a thing that would have any conscious attention on it.
Yeah.
Now, there would be a requirement to live sincerely into that role, and you would be considered to be a good person or not, based upon how fully and absolutely and completely you live into this role. The downside of this is, of course, that people would sometimes feel that a lot of pressure to live into that role, and it wasn't quite right or quite who they are or whatever. So it's not a perfect model at all for doing life, but nobody has existential crises because that's just life, and there's no framework to question it by. They can't go meta to it. They're inside of it. So then he talks about how this was slowly replaced due to changing socioeconomic conditions and this sort of thing by the dominant model of the 20th century, which is the authenticity model. Now, the authenticity model is different. It says, well, there's this true me, and I must find a way to express this true me into the world, right? But it's still not all about, I'm just going to be me and screw everyone else. We want the true me to be seen by people and acknowledged and witnessed and validated as being okay, right? It's not enough to just be like, screw it, I'm the true me. Everyone hates me, but I'm truly me. It's like, no, we want to be truly us and seen and acknowledged as being okay.
Yeah, and that actually be part of the model in a way. It's intrinsically. I was thinking a poet came to mind, as a poet, you're not just in your own bubble of like creating poetry. Part of the role of a poet, even if that is an authentic expression of that person, the poetry is going to be received by other people who is also going to then have an effect on.
Right.
That to me is like part of the poetry. Otherwise, you're not a poet if your poetry isn't being received by other people.
And you're going to get feedback on that. And the feedback you get on that is going to be part of the ongoing feedback loop that is selfing you.
Yes.
Right? So like this isn't that there's a selfing going on. There's a process of a constant creation of self. So it's back to this co-creation idea that I rather like. And so you get this feedback loop in both the sincerity model and the authenticity model.
I find it interesting how similar those two words are, and yet in this instance being used.
Well, he's using them as technical terms for a very specific thing. So, there are other ways, obviously, those words could be used. But so it's worth being aware that he has these labels are being used as technical
defined
terms.
And
Yes. I don't think he's saying this is the true nature of
No,
authenticity.
I got that. I just found it quite, just because I love words, I found it quite fascinating the way that
Yeah.
they're super
So
similar.
the way it is it's like you sincerely live your role, or you find a way to express your authenticity. But both ways, you still actually, the selfing process is reliant upon feedback from others, right? And this is something that's useful to bear in mind, because a lot of people go, oh, I shouldn't be so externally validating. Well, guess what? That's a part of being human.
Yes.
Nobody wants to get shit feedback from people all the time. It's just, forgive my language. But it's not what we want. So there's always this feedback loop, but the way we have it organized about what's important and the values of it is different underneath. So sincerity and authenticity have different value sets and a slightly different model of the world underneath them, but they still have this feedback loop, this selfing process, a co-creation of self with others, with the world around us. But he points out that the dominant model, more and more, like authenticity, is progressively becoming less and less the dominant model, and is being replaced by something that predates the internet but has become even more significant now that the internet is in place. And it's what he calls profilicity. So profilicity is different, because profilicity is about how we curate and present ourselves to others with the knowledge that we are curating and presenting ourselves. Right? And there's a meta aspect, because we're aware that we are being seen. And so, we are not just showing ourselves, but we are showing ourselves according to an image of how we expect others to see that. So it gets like this really kind of weird, complex thing. And almost everybody has to do it. Whether you're going to be online, you're going to put a dating profile up, even if you're letting something on Airbnb, you've got a profile there as a host or whatever. We have profiles everywhere, right? And what he points out is that this is actually a selfing technology like authenticity. People stuck in the authenticity model will often see people who are engaged in profilicity as being inauthentic, right? He says they're not inauthentic or narcissistic, for example. It's not about narcissism. It's just a different way of engaging with the world, because the peer that we are appealing to is different. With authenticity, it's the people around us. We want the people around us to see us for who we really are, our friends, our family, our work colleagues. In profilicity, it's what he calls the general peer. We don't always know who these people are. Right? We're guessing, we're in this space. But he points out there's a selfing. It's still selfing us. It isn't about narcissism. People aren't putting themselves up on the internet and showing their best selves because they're narcissistic. It's because that's the way people create their being in the world now. More and more.
This is brilliant. I love this so much.
Well, it's been a game changer for me, because, of course, like once he lays it out, I'm like, oh, that's obvious.
Yes, it's like, yeah, that's exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
But the distillation of that really is helpful to see.
Right. And it really helped me, because I've had an unconscious tension for a long time between an authenticity model, because I'm engaged in authenticity. I self through authenticity, and I self through profilicity. And without explicitly understanding them, they can come into tension with each other.
So do you see it now that you're recognizing that you're either doing one or the other, or do you see that you can kind of like Russian doll them, where you're expressing authenticity through profilicity?
Well, this is the thing. Like, profilicity isn't about being fake. It's about curating aspects of yourself. You could say your authentic self, but you're curating them.
Yes, as in you're not just, it's not unintentional. It is curated. It is intentional.
Yeah. And that's okay. But the thing that sort of helped me is, like, for a long time, I've been online and I've had a public profile and I've been engaged in profilicity for over a decade. And I've often had this tension between, like, am I really showing my authentic self here? Or, there's this thing. It's like, well, like I've sort of almost felt guilty if I'm not being fully authentic, but there are some things I don't want to have conversations about. I don't want to reveal my position on for whatever reason. And what this has helped me to see is that what I put up on my profile doesn't have to be all of who I am. It's a curation. And it's not fake because it's not all of who I am. It's not fake because it's only some of who I am, or it's reflecting some aspects of me. So like I found myself, like people would sometimes in comment sections and things attempt to push me into making commitments on things that I don't want to have a conversation about in that place. And I used to feel cornered. Like if I'm being authentic, I ought to answer my authentic answer. But what's kind of helped me with recognizing that I can do authenticity and I can do profilicity is that aspect of me doesn't belong in this profile.
Yes.
Right.
This is like, I feel like if there was, like,
go on.
I think this is an excellent episode and I'm really, you know, I think listeners are going to love it. But I feel like for me personally, this part of the conversation was like the reason to have this conversation. Like this is a game changer.
It's genuinely been a game changer for me because like there's so many places I felt caught, like almost cornered on you know in a comment section or you know in the YouTube comments or whatever. And now I don't have that anymore. Like a lot of tensions have gone. I know that's like not he's not a self-help guy, Hans Georg Müller. He's a philosopher. But the mind shift, he has a book, he's co-written it with somebody else, just for reference for people in case they're interested in it. It's just called You and Your Profile. So you'd never know it was a philosophy book. But it's pragmatic philosophy. To me, it's pragmatic philosophy. And he's co-authored it with somebody else, but his name is Hans, H-A-N-S, Georg, which is G-E-O-R-G, so like George, but no E, and Mueller, M-U-E-L-L-E-R. But I really love this book, You and Your Profile. To me, it has helped me escape some tensions that perhaps were actually hindering. I've been co-creating through conversation with the world for over a decade now, but I've had some tensions within that and had some things to wrestle through. And it's really helped me free myself from a lot of those tensions and to be able to be more clear about what I want to create and kind of get my ego unhooked from it a lot more effectively.
Yeah, I love this so much. I really do. Some like example of this that's been present for me for quite a few years that feels like it's an interesting view for me to now look at this through, which I'll do after the show. I'm not planning to spend the show now doing that, but I said a couple of years ago something like I don't know if I'll ever actually call myself a shaman, and that isn't because of the kind of, you know, potential of cultural appropriation. It's not even from the perspective of, as far as I'm concerned, it takes many, 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 many years to be at the point where you could accurately call yourself that. It's neither of those things, although, you know, they may be important or accurate for some people. For me, it's because, and this goes back to what you were first saying about, you know, we self in relationship is a kind of feedback loop. For me, the reason I have this sense of like, it isn't for me to call myself a shaman, because a shaman as an archetype and as a role only exists within a community.
Yeah,
it isn't
right.
You can't be a shaman without a community to be shamaning within. And so I said, you know, at the point where I'm ever called a shaman, it will be because I have a community that knows me as a shaman, because I am shamaning within that community.
Yeah.
And then through this conversation, I'm like, this is really interesting because that's true. And there's something interesting in this like profilicity that I'm like, given much of my community is actually online, there feels like there's a kind of like two different lenses that I can now see this through. I don't quite know where that's going to take me, but there's something this is where I'm like, okay, this is a new lens. I've not looked at all this through, and is now calling me. So just want to share that because it feels very aligned to everything we're talking about.
Right.
Not that I've got any real conclusions to draw because I haven't had a chance to ponder it yet, but just wanted to share that.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the points in his book. He's not trying to say that these are different, that one of these ways of selfing is right. It's just that these are three ways of selfing, and they don't actually have to be mutually exclusive, but it's worth recognizing how they work, how they can work together, what tensions could arise between them. So particularly between authenticity and profilicity. Like he stresses over and over again that profilicity is not inauthentic, but it is non-authentic. So it's not using that authenticity technology purely, but it's not, neither is it fake. And a lot of people, when they're caught in a authenticity model, will just go, well, that's just fake, that stuff, that online, that's all just staged or whatever. But profilicity is more performative. It is curated, but it's still a legitimate selfing technology, and it does feed back in. So people who are creating themselves through profilicity, they're not just being fake. They do care about the feedback. They are, it does affect their sense of self. So they are still in co-creation with the world. It's just with what he calls the general peer, rather than necessarily people in an immediate community around us.
I love this so much. I know we need to bring this conversation to a close, but it's definitely one that we could definitely just keep on having. But a couple of things just popped into mind. One is, the poetry example I gave earlier. It feels to me that that's really, it is an art form in a way, isn't it? A profile can be a creative expression, an art form in itself. And, just like, for example, I don't know, take the artist Klimt. I particularly like Klimt. One of his paintings isn't him. It's not his whole truth, but it's a truth.
Right,
that painting is a particular creative, intentional expression of him, you could say, that then creates a feedback loop between him and whoever consumes that particular painting. But it isn't him as a whole. It isn't an authentic expression of him as a whole.
Yes,
it feels like a profile is similar.
And I think that's a really good example, because Klimt might paint a particular painting and it's not fake because it's not him, right? It still has his truth in it. It's congruent with him. And this is the thing that Hans-Georg Müller is pointing out, is people want their profile to be congruent with them.
Yes.
It's just, it doesn't have to be the totality of who you are. And that's just, for me, that's the liberation. Because when I was thinking I ought to be authentic in my profile, I was getting caught up in this idea of, well, is there stuff that I'm hiding? I'm like, should I reveal everything? It's like, well, this isn't the time or place. There are conversations I'll have with people in the pub, because we have a different dynamic. There's a live feedback loop. The nonverbals are there to support it. This kind of thing that is not going to work on Twitter, for example. Do you see what I mean? So it's recognizing that in different places we can present different aspects of self, and this idea, because you use the idea of Klimt there. And he uses this idea of curating the profile. Now, artists curate an exhibition. They don't feel I have to put up every painting I've ever painted in the same exhibition.
It just wouldn't be congruent if I didn't use the crappy ones under my bed I did 20 years ago.
Yeah. I've got to reveal all of who I am. I have to put, there's no obligation to do it. Do you see what I mean?
Yes.
So to me, that's been a hugely liberating thing.
Yeah, for me too. I can already feel it liberating me in this moment.
Yeah, check out the book. It's worth checking out.
No, I really will. I'll make sure we link it in the show notes as well. So I feel like we've gone so far down a rabbit hole. I'm going to ask you to lead us back up to the surface to close the show. James, how would you like to finish our conversation about the conversation we're having with the world as we're having the conversation with the world?
It was always going to get meta on meta. I just think, to To me, it comes back down to aliveness and interactivity and feedback loops. I love the Hans-Georg Müller stuff because he recognizes we do not exist independent of everything in the world around us. We create ourselves with, and I think we do. I think we create ourselves. We are selfing in every conversation, but we are also creating not just ourselves, but other possibilities. And of course, the people we're engaging with, we're participating in their selfing when we talk with them. And I think that's true whether we do so one-on-one, whether we're doing so through an interactive feedback loop. You put out podcasts, you undoubtedly get feedback from the podcasts. You know, I put up YouTube videos, people comment. The loop goes around. I run mentoring groups, we're in conversation. So we get this generative dialogue occurring. And I think, in a sense, that dialogue it's almost like the life, it's part of the significant lifeblood of being human, and you know how we as humans engage with the world and engage with each other. And it always creates dialogue, creates interaction, creates in a variety of different ways. And I'm recognizing that, you know, if somebody's just listening to this going, well, I just wanted to know how to promote my business.
Talk to James's marketing consultant from 2008.
Yeah. You know, but even he was clear. You get on video, have that conversation with the world. You know, it creates conversation, creates through whatever medium.
Thank you, James. You led us out of that rabbit hole beautifully.
Phew. That's a relief.
So where can listeners go have a conversation with you?
I've got quite a few websites and things, but I think you can find your way to most of my stuff, and you can find your way to my YouTube channel, and I've got a podcast myself called Tripp and Crow, but you can find it all through jamestripp.co.uk currently. I still haven't moved it all onto the .com, but it needs to happen. So jamestripp.co.uk, just that simple.
Wonderful. And then as soon as we finish, I'm going to go straight to your YouTube channel and look at your old street hypnosis videos.
Yeah, you have to go way back. just click and do it in reverse order and just look at the awful old stuff. I cringe even thinking about it.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, James. I think this could be, of all the many, many conversations we've had in all different forms and different mediums, I think this might have been my favorite.
Oh, it could have been. There's some really good stuff here. I'm just like thinking, I wish we'd have more time to explore some of it, but
okay, you know, maybe we need to do another episode just to continue the conversation we began last time.
I don't want to take over your podcast. But I'm always happy to come on as a guest.
Thank you so much, James. Until next time, which may not be too long.
Indeed. Thank you.